Okay, the first Avengers Doomsday teaser has supposedly leaked, but I'm not yet convinced it's real. I have seen it. I'm going to talk about it a little later. I'm going to be over on ScreenCrush for a live stream with Ryan and Tommy where we're going to give our thoughts and detailed reactions to the trailer itself and what this means for future trailers to come. Now that we supposedly have a taste of what the teasers are going to look like. So, I've seen this supposedly leaked trailer. I saw it with my own eyes, and it does feature, spoiler warning, Steve Rogers, Chris Evans pulling up in front of his house, the same house that we saw at the very end of Avengers Endgame, where he went back and created that alternate timeline where he lived a life with Peggy. And yes, he created an alternate timeline and a life with Peggy. The Russos have confirmed that it wasn't within the mainline MCU 616 universe that we had experienced and he was just living in the shadows. No, it was an alternate timeline. And my theory has been that the reason that that timeline was able to exist and wasn't stopped by the TVA is because Loki is now at the throne, because the events of Loki season 1 and Loki season 2 already happened instantaneously from the perspective of all time occurring at once or whatever. We won't get into that. But the moment that Loki escaped in Avengers Endgame with the Tesseract, he was on the throne by the end of Avengers Endgame. So come the end of Endgame, the multiverse now had free will and was being held by Loki, which allowed for Steve to create this alternate timeline. So that's what we're seeing here in this teaser. We're seeing Steve Rogers living his life in that new timeline. He pulls up on his motorcycle, takes his helmet off, goes inside the house. We see him looking at his old suit, his cap suit from Avengers Endgame that he was wearing when he went back in time to return the stones. He's putting the suit in a box and he's closing it. And then we see him go and hold his newborn baby. Now, we hear this slow piano Avengers theme playing in the background. We then get a cut to black that says Steve Rogers will return in Avengers Doomsday. And we get a Doomsday clock. Very cool. But I am still not convinced that this is real. And I'll tell you why here in just a second. But first, let's briefly talk about the teaser. I'm not going to say too much because I'm on my lunch break and I need to get back to work and my wife will get the video uploaded and all that. And I want to save some stuff or a lot of my, commentary for our live stream over on ScreenCrush. But these are just my initial, out of the gate, oh, I just saw it reactions. But so let's talk about, assuming it's real, let's talk about the teaser. I've said for a long time, even before it was in all the major outlets reporting it, that I felt that Doomsday should and would be serving as a direct sequel to Endgame. It would be a movie that you could watch without having seen anything since Avengers Endgame. And it would directly pick up on and serve as a story that features the consequences and the ramifications of the Avengers actions in Endgame with the time heist and Steve creating that branch timeline. Now, here in a second, I do want to share with you a segment from my show that I really hope you'll watch because we really dove deep into all of that, Steve's role in Doomsday and what it could look like. And it pairs so well with this news. So I hope that you'll watch that. It's good stuff. Now, if this is real, I think it's awesome. It picks up on the classic, so-and-so will return that we came to love in the Infinity Saga, where it would say, Thor will return in Avengers Age of Ultron or whatever. It's very neat. It sets a cool precedent for this whole idea that there will be more than one teaser. The current rumor is that there will be 4 teasers throughout 4 weeks, week by week, which could be all be character teasers like this one, and this could be a way of announcing more cast than the 27 we already know of. You could have an X-Men one, a Tobey Maguire Spider-Man one. I'll talk about all that here in a second as well. I know I keep saying that, but there's so much to say. And you could really build up to this event, this slow burn. I love the Doomsday Clock thing, just starting to tease while we're a year out what is to come. Now, the reason I am 50-50 on this being real, and you should see me, I'm getting massacred in the work chat. Everybody believes it's real, and I want to believe it's real, but that is because we live in a world where this 100% could be revealed to be a completely AI generated thing. That's not far-fetched at all. Plus, it's this fuzzy cell phone footage that looks like a little too fuzzy for me to believe it's real, to, I think, cover some of the AI-ness of it, the look of it. God, I sound old. We have all been speculating, and I've seen plenty of like AI videos on socials and stuff where it's Steve at his house back in time and Doom like knocking on his door. And some of them are really good, some of them suck. So I do really think, though, that this could be a trailer with all this hype that, oh, a trailer's coming, a trailer's coming. I think that this could be one that was created with AI and has been sent around, and it's so good that people are actually believing that it's a real leak. Now, some reliable leakers are saying, they're not the ones that leaked it, but they're saying this is legit. So maybe they heard something and then this is it. So, okay, let's see if that's true. If it is true, I think it's neat. It's better than having, I think, like a bunch of like full on like trailer ones, like, you know, a standard trailer. This is a nice slow burn, like short teaser start. But I'm still just kind of not sure as to whether or not it's real. Now, here in a second, I do want to share with you another series of teasers that I think, if this one is real, that this one is setting up and that we could be seeing in the future weeks. But first, while we're on the topic, let's talk about Steve's role in this movie, in Doomsday. Because if this is real, if this teaser is real, it has basically just become, this is basically confirmation that Steve Rogers has just become our leading man of this movie, or at least one of them. It's huge news. So let's jump into that.
What I've always meant when I've said that Doomsday will be a direct sequel to Avengers Endgame is that you will be able to watch Avengers Doomsday and fully follow that movie without having seen any of the other shows and movies that have come out between the two films. Now, of course, it will be a bonus if you have seen, you know, the multiverse saga stuff, but it won't be a requirement. Avengers Doomsday will be made in a way that you'll not only understand what's going on and not feel like you missed something, but it will also pick up on story beats that were established in Endgame. The consequences of the Avengers tampering with time to undo Thanos' snap. Steve selfishly staying in the past with Peggy and creating a branching timeline. And yes, he did create a branching timeline. The Russos confirmed that years ago when Endgame came out. Now, you know, that was their interpretation and their intention, despite the writers of Endgame preferring Steve, the storyline of Steve having, or the writers interpreted it as Steve having like lived his entire life in secret in Universe 616, the mainline MCU. Which, from a story perspective, I think would be more interesting to learn that in the mainline MCU, Peggy Carter's husband that we always hear mention of was actually Steve Rogers, and that they had kids, and she just like kept it, you know, to herself. And then by the time she actually met Steve in the future, she began to, she had Alzheimer's, I believe. So, and she would get confused and stuff. So that might be why Steve never actually learned of the existence of his other self. But then that gets weird, because then it's already weird that he made out with Peggy's niece. It's already weird. It gets weirder if he becomes her actual uncle. But we don't have to worry about that, because the Russos, they've always been clear that Steve Rogers traveled to the past to live life with Peggy, and that when doing so, that did create an alternate timeline that was not, you know, done away with like the others were when he returned the Infinity Stones, which we'll talk about here in a second. That was a branching timeline that's not supposed to exist. So what happened, according to the Russos, was, you know, he created that branching timeline. He lived in that universe, he grew old, and he as an old man then traveled back to his home universe, which we saw in Endgame, where he then gave Sam the shield. More on that in a second. I have stuff to say about that. Now, not only are we going to see Steve's, you know, staying in the past play into this, but the Russos have said that Tony's snap also plays a big part in the story of Doomsday. And I think that it's not only teasing that perhaps RDJ's Doom will be a Doom who survived the snap and is infused with his suit. His face is all fucked up and he's so powerful because he still has the Infinity Stones. But, you know, maybe that's not the case. Maybe what they meant is that the very fact that Tony created time travel, tampered with time, and got those stones in the first place and snapped all those people back and snapped away Thanos and gave Steve Rogers the ability to create this other universe where he is living a life with Peggy. Maybe we're finally going to see the consequences of all of those actions come Doomsday. And I mean, you know, Tony did say in Endgame to Steve, you know, when you mess with time, it tends to mess back. So Endgame, in so many ways, wasn't just a closing chapter, I don't think, for the Infinity Saga, but it was an epilogue for the Multiverse Saga. That's where all of this multiverse stuff was really, the groundwork was laid for it. So I think from a story perspective, it just makes perfect sense to have these films super closely connected. The narrative calls for it. And then, of course, from a business perspective, it's just a smart choice because, facts are facts. And the Multiverse Saga, it has not had the same numbers, the same performance as the Infinity Saga. It hasn't performed as well. And they put out really just way too much shit. And even people who wanted to watch everything just didn't have the time. They weren't able to make the time to watch it all because, they have like lives and jobs and stuff. So you can't make an Avengers movie that you want to make $2 billion. If you want your Avengers movie to make $2 billion, which they do, you can't make it in a way that requires audiences to have seen a bunch of movies and shows that they haven't seen. If you want your new Avengers movie to do well, you make it not only a movie that everyone who saw Endgame can go watch and be able to follow, and let's face it, everyone saw Endgame multiple times, but you can't just make it something they can watch. You got to make it something they want to go watch. So yeah, I was glad to hear these reports that Doomsday is the direct sequel to Endgame. Now, to those who are being smartasses about it and saying, "Oh, breaking news! Avengers 5 is a sequel to Avengers 4," you're just showing you have no media literacy or reading comprehension, really, because Avengers 3, it was not a direct sequel to Avengers 2. Yeah, it was the third one, and the Ultron was the second one, but it's not a direct sequel. Avengers 2 is not a direct sequel to Avengers 1. Endgame, yes, was a direct sequel to Infinity War, but they came out a year apart. These movies, Endgame and Doomsday, they're coming out like 7 years apart. So when we say direct sequel, we mean that it can be watched without having seen anything prior. You can watch Endgame and then watch Doomsday and not have to have seen anything else. Now, there's also news that Marvel is not only re-releasing Endgame in theaters in October, so, just like 2 months before the release of Doomsday, but that there are some reports that there might be a new post-credit scene, which I can guarantee you there will be a brand new post-credit scene added to Endgame that sets up Doomsday. And we may already know what that post-credit scene is. The original cut of Endgame, it had no post-credit scene, but it did have a post-credit sound. The sound of Tony Stark from Iron Man 1 for the very first time hammering away at his metal mask. The moment that he became Iron Man. And I, months ago, like maybe almost a year ago now, did a video discussing how this could have very well been a hint that RDJ would be returning years later with a whole new mask, but the same task. That task being to save the world, but as Victor Von Doom. Now, many called me crazy because that would mean that the idea of RDJ returning as Doctor Doom was in Kevin Feige's mind at the time that Endgame was being made. To which I say, of course it was in his mind, because Kevin Feige wanted RDJ to play Doctor Doom before the fucking MCU even existed, when he was the producing on the old Tim Story Fantastic Four movies. So I 100% believe that during the making of Endgame, when Kevin Feige was already fully aware of what his loose plans for the multiverse saga would be, I think he totally was open to the idea of bringing RDJ back as Doctor Doom. The Russos and RDJ and Feige have all said that that's an idea they were kicking around for a while. So I could totally see a scenario, and Feige did deny that there was any meaning behind that post-credit sound other than just being a tribute. But even if that is the case, I still think they were planting seeds for a potential return, and I think that was part of it. I think it was a little clue. Now, over on New Rockstars, I saw them speculating that in-game post-credit sound could be turned into a post-credit scene for the re-release and actually showing us RDJ as Victor Von Doom making his metal mask. And yeah, I think that's a great guess at what the scene could be. Another option is Steve and Peggy at their quiet home, and there's a knock at the door, and it's Sam Wilson, maybe, Reed Richards, and whoever else, and they're there to recruit Steve for the fight against Doom. That would be epic. I mean, imagine that. Imagine Sam at Steve's door as Captain America, holding the shield that Steve, as an old man, would go on to give him, and that did give him. That Sam that is standing there holding the shield, he will have gotten that shield in his past from Old Man Steve Rogers, but that Old Man Steve Rogers is that Steve Rogers' future. That would be dope. Now, while we're on the topic, I also want to touch on this new rumor that Avengers Doomsday is going to focus on Chris Evans, Steve Rogers versus Robert Downey Jr.'s Doctor Doom. And that these two icons, the two most popular faces of the MCU, despite, both having been MIA since Endgame, MIA for this entire saga. So look, there is no doubt that Chris Evans is coming back as Steve Rogers in Doomsday. It's happening, period. But this idea of him being the protagonist of the film, like the lead hero, and he wasn't part of the chair announcement, and there have been no pictures of him on set, nothing leaked that he's, around. Like, he's totally there, but I don't think he's the lead, like the guy going up against RDJ as Doom. Yeah, if he were, it would be poetic, it would be cool, but I don't know how I feel about it, because look, we've seen Cap versus Tony in Civil War. Hell, they've bickered all throughout the entire Infinity Saga to the point that they finally reached that moment where they were actually physically fighting, and then their breakup led to the events of Infinity War and Endgame. It's been done. So yeah, it would be cool. It would make sense. They're both these OG Avengers. And yeah, sure, it'd be cool if these two leads were returning, but then that really starts to feel like they are just completely sidestepping this multiverse saga that has come before. My preference would be that Reed Richards, like in the comics, served in this lead protagonist role for the film. I think that would set up Pedro Pascal and the character of Reed Richards to be this star, this beloved character in the MCU that can finally begin to fill the massive shoes left behind by Chris Evans and RDJ. And I don't necessarily mean that, post Secret Wars, RDJ and Chris Evans both have to go. No, but you need some other new characters that also have that same level of just absolute love and admiration that Steve Rogers and Tony Stark have, or RDJ playing Victor Von Doom. You can't just have it be them two. They can't carry this entire thing forever, is what I'm trying to say. So I want to see Reed serving as the main lead protagonist, going up against Doom, because that I'm not saying that you have to do everything like it's done in the comics, but Reed Richards versus Victor Von Doom. That's a classic. It's what you do. You know what I mean? So I kind of hope to see him in that lead role alongside Thor and maybe Loki. Hell, I think Loki would also be a great option, because now here RDJ is playing the villain of the MCU, this Avengers film, and Loki has flipped to being a hero. And both characters, they've had these massive transformations. They have a lot of similarities with their massive egos and stuff. So that would be great as well. So, yeah, I hope it's Reed and Loki. I want Steve in the movie, and I want to see Steve all up in that fight against Doom. But I also, I want his role to be more like a mentor, like an elder statesman type feeling role. I want him maybe beating himself up over his part in all of this multiversal chaos and feeling bad that his selfishness, for the first time in his life being selfish, is what may have very well resulted in the death of trillions, and perhaps even this dark reality where Tony Stark went a very different path. But here's the kicker. What if Steve isn't fighting Doom? What if he's on Team Doom? And no, I don't mean as an evil Steve Rogers. I don't mean Captain Hydra. It's not going to happen, I don't think. I mean a Steve Rogers who is recruited by this variant version of his old friend, who is perhaps scarred by his heroic sacrifice that Steve witnessed to save the universe, and who invented the very time travel that allowed Steve to have this life in the first place that Tony had told him to, get. If Doom, who looks like Tony, comes to Steve's door and tells him that he needs him because the entire multiverse is about to collapse and everyone and everything that Steve loves will be dead, and makes Steve feel somewhat responsible for it, Steve Rogers will, of course, answer that call and join his old friend to save the multiverse. And he will think he's doing the right thing and that he's on the right side of the fight. And then comes Secret Wars. Maybe he realizes, wait, Doom is the bad guy. And Sam appeals to Steve's, better angels, knowing that Steve is not the type to trade lives. And then Steve could, help bring down Doom, and they save the multiverse and happy ending. But, maybe he's even the one who talks down Doom, because in the Secret Wars comics, Doom is talked down and kind of like surrenders his power. So maybe we see Steve do that in Secret Wars.
Okay, so some other teasers I think we could get that are in the same vein as this one could be like an X-Men teaser, or maybe like a Hugh Jackman Wolverine teaser, something done in the same vein as this one. A Tobey Maguire Spider-Man teaser where we see him after the events of No Way Home, maybe even with his family, and like maybe we see MJ and his daughter, and then putting like his suit into that signature trunk that we know from the Raimi films, and then we see Spider-Man will return in Avengers Doomsday. That would be really cool. You really could make like 10 or 15 of these fucking things and just like sprinkle them at random across theaters at different movies and different showtimes for weeks. It would be dope. Like just like drop 5 now at just different theaters, different showtimes, like at random, like, oh, which one did you see? Which one did you see? And then like the next week, oh, there's 2 more new ones. Like that would be cool, and would be this cool like guerrilla marketing campaign, I think, for the trailer. But okay, I really look at my wrist, my watch list wrist to tell you I gotta go. But I do see the time here. I do gotta go. We're doing a live stream on ScreenCrush at 2 o'clock Eastern to talk about this trailer. Be sure you tune in for that. All right, I will see you guys soon.